The 1970s was perhaps Formula One's most glamorous era. Drivers were brave, daring, dashing and desirable, whilst death was the unseen passenger on board a Grand Prix car every time the driver left the pits. During that period, one man epitomised everything which made Formula One the most exciting sport on the planet: speed, charisma and rebellion. A controversial figure who wore his heart on his sleeve, 1976 Formula One world champion James Hunt. Hunt's journey to Formula One was anything but conventional. Born to an affluent family and enjoying the privileges of a public school upbringing, he seemed likely to chase his fortune with a racket and a ball, excelling at both tennis and squash. However, a trip with friends to Silverstone on his 18th birthday decided him on racing as a career. Out of a genuine love of speed, or because the glamour of racing would increase his already high appeal with young ladies, isn't really known. Perhaps both equally swayed his decision. Whatever the case, his parents refused to support his crazy, in their eyes, decision. So he worked odd jobs in order to fund a racing career and purchased cars and parts in order to race. Starting in a Mini before moving into Formula Ford, Formula 3 and then Formula 2, his aggressive driving style and obvious talent quickly caught the attention of the racing world. It was also in these junior categories that he earned the nickname Hunt the Shunt, for his almost magnetic ability to collide with rivals in controversial circumstances. His time racing in these lower formulae was far from successful in terms of outright results. However, his driving did bring him to the attention of Lord Alexander Hesketh, who was planning an entry into Formula One with a brand new team. In Hunt, Hesketh saw exactly the sort of driver to front the operation. British, good-looking, well-spoken, and from a public school background, Hunt was the perfect figurehead for the Hesketh Racing organisation. More importantly, Hunt and Hesketh shared a love for the good life, and especially for partying. With a vast fortune to back his team, Hesketh didn't need sponsors and was able to run his operation in his own image. As a result, the Hesketh team epitomised the champagne lifestyle which would become the global image of Formula One thereafter. Hesketh's entry into Formula One was not taken lightly though. He saw in Hunt a potential winner and looked to build a team which could create the car to back his man. He initially purchased a March Formula One car for Hunt to race, but had bolder plans to build his own racer. To counter the flamboyant style of Hesketh himself, the team had two characters with an eye for detail, who would provide the team with the professionalism it needed to succeed: team manager Bubbles Horsley and chief mechanic Dave Sims. When Harvey Postlethwaite was recruited to design the team's own car, it had all the ingredients necessary for victory. In 1975, halfway through the team's first season running its own car, Hunt claimed his first, and the team's only, Grand Prix win at Zandvoort in Holland. Niki Lauda, then well on his way to claiming the World Championship, and teammate Clay Regazzoni qualified their Ferraris on the first row of the grid. But Hunt claimed third place and made the most of changeable conditions resulting from rain showers on race day, executing a perfectly timed pit stop at a time when the drivers made that call, without recourse to weathermen, pit-to-car radio or satellite tracking of storms. Having claimed the lead, Hunt held off the fast-recovering Ferrari of Lauda to claim victory by 1 second from his occasional Formula 3 rival. Hesketh's little hobby team had beaten its storied opponents and taken a fairy tale victory. By the end of the year, however, Lord Hesketh realised that running a competitive Formula One team was beyond the means of even the richest individual, and after being unable to secure backing to continue racing, he decided to close the doors of the Hesketh Racing organisation, effectively leaving Hunt without a drive for 1976. However, the fates had decided that Hunt was going to be a Formula One world champion, and their first intervention came at this point. Double world champion Emerson Fittipaldi, who had been expected to remain with the McLaren team alongside German Jochen Mass, decided that he would instead prefer to drive for his family's Copersucar team and left McLaren in November 1975. faced with a barren driver market. McLaren boss Teddy Mayer turned to Hunt, who was by now free of obligations following Hesketh's closure. Despite his reputation as a playboy and risk-taker, who crashed rather more often than was sensible given the death rate among Grand Prix drivers, Mayer also saw potential in Hunt and, as a proven race winner, gambled that he would be able to lead the team in 1976, partnered alongside the rather more sensible and pedestrian Jochen Mass. The deal was agreed just days before testing for the 1976 season was to begin, allowing Hunt to maximise his driving time in the McLaren M23 before facing the heat of competition. The 1976 season remains one of the most dramatic in Formula One history. Hunt was to prove to be the main challenger to Niki Lauda, who looked for all the world like he would win a second title to go with the one he had won in 1975. Lauda had won 4 of the first 6 races of the season, finishing second in the other 2. Racing into a 33-point lead in the championship, Hunt had claimed his first victory for McLaren in Spain, as well as securing pole position for the opening 2 races of the season. The McLaren was fast, but Hunt had already been involved in a couple of accidents which had cost him points, and was initially disqualified from his victory in Spain because his car was judged to be too wide. In France, Hunt claimed his second victory of the season, but even with his Spanish victory reinstated after an appeal by the team, he still sat 26 points behind Lauda, with a seemingly impossible mountain to climb if he were to beat the Austrian to the title. Hunt took what he thought was his third victory of the season, in front of a partisan British crowd. The race had initially been halted after the first corner, when Regazzoni crashed into his teammate Lauda and a multiple car incident was triggered. Hunt's car, along with those of Laffite and Regazzoni, was too badly damaged to take the restart. However, fearful of a riot by the British crowd, the organisers allowed all 3 to take the restart in their spare cars, contrary to the rules. Having claimed victory from Lauda, Hunt was then disqualified, and victory handed to the Austrian. With a 35-point lead to overcome and only 7 races remaining, it seemed unlikely that Hunt could challenge for the title. In Germany, famously, Lauda argued against the race going ahead. The Nürburgring circuit was too long to be properly marshalled, and safety equipment could take a long time to arrive if a driver crashed. Paired with the region's weather, which meant that parts of the track were virtual rivers whilst others were dry, Lauda felt that the race should not go ahead. Failing to win his argument, Lauda and his peers went ahead with the race. On the second lap of the circuit, he crashed heavily, was trapped in his burning car, and was only saved by the efforts of drivers who fought their way into the flames to undo his seatbelts and pull him from certain death. Even so, it was touch and go as to whether he would survive the accident. He was given the last rites and spent the next week in a perilous position. Back at the circuit, Hunt won the restarted race, came 4th in Austria, and then won again in Holland. Even so, when Lauda made his miraculous return to racing at Monza, Hunt was still 14 points adrift in the title battle. Lauda's remarkable 4th place at the Italian Grand Prix, along with Hunt's failure to finish, extended that to 17 points with just 3 races to run. Hunt won in Canada and the USA, whilst Lauda could only manage a 3rd place at Watkins Glen, meaning that the title fight would come down to a single race shootout at Mount Fuji in Japan. Lauda held a 3-point lead, which meant that only a win would guarantee Hunt the title. Otherwise, the championship would be decided by the gap between them at the finish line. Race day in Fuji dawned to the most awful thunderstorm, and whilst Lauda started the race, he soon came to the decision that the title was not as important as his life, and at the end of the first lap pulled into the pits to retire. Hunt now just needed to finish in 4th place to win the title. In chaotic conditions, with cars spearing off the road everywhere, Hunt did just enough to get his car to the line and clinch the title with a 3rd place finish. The playboy had come good, even if the result owed much to luck, being in the right place at the right time, and circumstance. The battle between Hunt and Lauda was perhaps the most glamorous of the era. On one side, Lauda, who had a reputation, perhaps unfairly, of being robotic, humourless and dry. Hunt, meanwhile, was wild, on and off the track, and partied harder than ever in the midst of the championship battle. It was the perfect story for the media and the public. For most of the summer the battle enthralled, and Hunt's playboy image became iconic. 1976 was to be as good as it got for Hunt, at least in racing terms. The McLaren M26 introduced in 1977 turned out to be problematic, not particularly quick, and massively unreliable too. Hunt, as ever, managed to get into numerous scrapes, and his championship defence was a huge disappointment. 1978 was no improvement, and it was to end with the most controversial period and incident of Hunt's career. all resulting from a botched start at the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. What happened at Monza is well known, but at the time reputations and accusations clouded the picture. The bare facts are that the starter turned on the green light before the field had completely come to a stop. Midfield cars engulfed the front rows of the grid, with several taking to the old circuit on the right to pass slower moving cars in front of them. As the cars then funneled back onto the main circuit approaching the first chicane, there was contact involving several cars. Ronnie Peterson's Lotus was spun to the right and rammed headfirst into the Armco barrier before bouncing back across the track in flames. Several more cars were caught up in the collision. Peterson was pulled from his burning car by Hunt, DePaye and Regazzoni, but died the following morning from a fat embolism during surgery for his leg injuries. James Hunt's car had initiated Peterson's accident, the McLaren's left front tyre hitting Peterson's right rear, pitching into the barriers. Hunt blamed Riccardo Patrese, who was one of the drivers who had moved right onto the old circuit and then cut back to the left. Hunt claimed Patrese's arrows had hit his McLaren, pushing it into the Lotus and causing the carnage. Patrese pointed to the complete absence of damage to his car as evidence that this wasn't true, but few were prepared to take the word of an Italian rookie against that of a former world champion. At the following race at Watkins Glen, Hunt led a group of senior drivers who demanded Patrese be banned from the race. He was vociferous in his criticism of Patrese, and Arrows withdrew their entry even though a US court had decided the ban was illegal. Investigators eventually determined that Patrese was not involved in the accident, and video evidence clearly showed the Arrows well ahead of the McLaren when it rejoined the circuit. Hunt had been the cause of the accident, and indirectly the cause of Peterson's death. Was Hunt's attempt to blame Patrese deflection? Was he so unable to handle the guilt over his part in the accident that he needed to lash out and Patrese was an easy target? At the end of the season, Hunt left McLaren, seeking new motivation with Walter Wolff's team, but an uncompetitive car, perhaps added to the trauma of Peterson's death, had sapped his passion for racing, and midway through the season, Hunt walked away from Formula One. His 1976 nemesis Niki Lauda also retired from Formula One just a few months later, similarly disaffected with the sport. Whilst Lauda focused on running his airline, Hunt started a new and highly successful career as co-commentator for BBC's Formula One coverage, forming an unforgettable partnership with Murray Walker. There was almost one further postscript to the Hunt Formula One story. In early 1981, McLaren, having fallen on hard times since Hunt's 76 championship win, was taken over by Ron Dennis's Project 4 team with support from main sponsor Marlboro. The latter wanted a big name in the team for publicity purposes, and Dennis approached Hunt about a return to the car for 1982. Negotiations progressed some way before Hunt decided that it wasn't for him. Dennis eventually persuaded Niki Lauda to come out of retirement, and the Austrian won his third race back, and by the end of 1984 had added a third world championship to his trophy cabinet. Sticking with commentary proved to be a good choice for Hunt. His partnership with Walker was responsible for a growth in popularity in Formula One in the UK and other countries which received the BBC commentary feed. Hunt's laid-back, knowledgeable interjections, alongside Walker's wildly enthusiastic and high-velocity commentary, made them an unmissable partnership. Sadly, Hunt also carried out a verbal vendetta against Riccardo Patrese, taking every opportunity to bash the Italian, a vendetta which only ended with Hunt's sudden death of a heart attack in 1993. James Hunt's legacy is as complex as the man himself. Known for his partying lifestyle and fiery temper, he was both loved and criticised. His temperament often led to clashes, both on and off the track. These incidents added to his bad boy image, but also raised questions about his professionalism. He was guilty of attacking race marshals on more than one occasion, and there have been strong rumours that some of his on-track behaviour was driven by the consumption of cocaine before races. Yet for all that, he was, on his day at least, a match for any other driver in Formula One in the mid-70s. And whilst his title in 1976 had an element of fortune to it, he still needed to be there to pick up the pieces after Lauda's accident. His story reminds us that legends are not defined just by victories, but by the passion and personality they bring to the sport. James Hunt, a champion on the track, a maverick off it, and a legend forever.